In the 1960s, the civil rights movement was in full swing, with demonstrations and talks all across the country. Towards the end of 1963, two speakers visited Kalamazoo, Michigan, to talk about social justice and inequality.
As I told you, I had worked for WIDR when I was a student, and also when I was a student, I worked for WMCR, which is now WMUK, and I worked as a student announcer. And I can't remember when, but somewhere along there I became the program director at WMUK. A little background about leading up to Martin Luther King was earlier that same year of 1963, I think it was in September, the student council or the student organization had invited Governor Ross Barnett of Mississippi, who was basically a racist governor. Governor Barnett came, and so WMUK broadcast that speech. And anyway, I basically did most of the announcing duties. So when Martin Luther King was coming, it was my job to do the play-by-play, because we were going to broadcast it live. There was no question about that.
After receiving an invitation from students, Martin Luther King Jr. made his way to Kalamazoo to give a speech to community members on a cold and extremely snowy day in December of 1963.
It was a miserable night out, and it was heavy, wet snow, and there was about a foot of it on the ground. So it got late. It was late getting started because they wanted to give people a chance to negotiate. Even in those days, the parking was rotten up here. Although most of the movers and shakers in Kalamazoo were there, all the civil rights people were there from Kalamazoo people. I think there were a couple of legislators there. I must say, those people who attended, it was worth the trip. Though that man, he was mesmerizing, electrifying.
MLK spoke to an estimated 2,000 people in Read Fieldhouse about love for one another and illuminating the problems people face across the country.
Well, in August, he'd given the I Have a Dream speech, and there were bits of his speech that alluded to that. You could tell, it was in the same spirit. It was all about love and brotherhood and the value of knowing your history. It was just a wonderful speech. There was all this call and response. He would say a phrase that was that sort of demanded a response, and the audience would respond as with one voice. It was mesmerizing. People were just entranced. He had that audience in the palm of his hand. He could have read the phone book, but of course he had a much more important message.
MLK's time in Kalamazoo and efforts across the country have left a long-lasting impression nationwide and here locally.
The reverberating effects of that visit were felt most poignantly after his assassination, when the Black Action Movement, which was a Black organization on campus led by students and faculty, came up with a list of demands that they wanted to see upon his assassination. I guess him being assassinated was the catalyst for this group to kind of really fight for things that they wanted to see for Black students in particular. Just his presence and his words and the echoing impact of his visit prompted actions that reverberated across the entire university and are still present today, like our African American Studies program and the minor and the major, as well as the MLK Scholars. That was something that was initiated from the Black Action Movement.
To commemorate MLK Day, the Lewis Walker Institute will be holding several events centered on MLK's legacy and teachings.
So we have every year the Lewis Walker Institute has what we call an MLK teach-in. And so the teach-in is a series of sessions that are led by either students, faculty, or staff that kind of harkens upon the words and the legacy of MLK. We're really trying to help people understand how to have just basic dialogue. So it's not going to be formal where there's going to be panelists. There's going to be intergenerational thoughts and ideas around what does it mean to be an activist. The theme of the MLK teach-in focuses on MLK's blueprint for our lives. About 6 months before he was assassinated, he delivered a speech to junior high students. But in that speech, it was a very short speech, but he asked the students, what is the blueprint for your life? We are the architects of our life, so what does that vision look like? And so he laid out for us kind of these different principles and pillars that we should be thinking of as we develop our lives for a life of justice.
The Lewis Walker Institute will be holding more events during their MLK week. Each event is based on self-restoration and creating an open dialogue for change. You can find more information about these events at wmich.edu/MLK/events.
I think anytime you are able to be in the presence or be around someone who speaks with such prophetic wisdom as Dr. King, in which he's talking about humanity and justice and love and care, I think that is something that's rare on college campuses oftentimes.
You know, he wasn't a terribly tall person, but he had this magnetic presence. He seemed very large. You know, when he was the minute he took the microphone, you knew you were in the presence of something good. And it's too bad all these generations, that have been deprived of him.
In Kalamazoo, I'm Aidan Ralko, Western Herald.